and welcome to the 99% Local Podcast. Yes, another week. And this is week 2 of my focus on literacy and reading. I really hope you enjoyed the conversation last week with Brittany Shaw from Hidden Stories 615. Before we get into this week's episode, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can do that at 99percentlocalpod@gmail.com or hit me up on Instagram at 99percentlocalpod. If you would like to contribute to this podcast, you can do that. I have t-shirts and I have stickers. If you'd like to just give me some money, you can certainly do that too. You can do that at 99percentlocalpod/contribute. And just a note, 10% of all money given to this podcast goes to the Jetpack Project in Spring Hill, Tennessee. All right, I'm pretty excited about this week's guest. On the show, I have Amy Parker, who is a best-selling author for Children at Heart. Amy has written and co-written more than 60 books for kids, teens, and adults with 1.8 million copies sold. Through Amy's career as an author and writer, she has collaborated with authors from New York Times bestsellers and even one of her own sons. Amy just released 2 new books back on October 15th, which we discuss on the episode. A few of the more interesting things, in my opinion, not related to children specifically, that Amy has done is she's collaborated with Jack Hanna, yes, Jungle Jack, on his autobiography and helping share the story of Frederick. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name because I will mess it up. But Frederick has a story of survival and triumph from being caught up in the Rwandan genocide that erupted in 1994. Amy has also recently ventured into the podcast world, hosting the Bible for Kids podcast alongside Mike Nawrocki. If that name sounds familiar, that's because he is the author and co-creator of VeggieTales. I'll put a link to that show in the show notes. Let's get to it. Here is my conversation with best-selling children's author Amy Parker. I'm here with Amy Parker, best-selling author for Children at Heart. Amy is a local award-winning author and has written and co-written more than 60 books for children, teens, and adults, with 1.8 million copies sold, including best-selling A Night Night Prayer, Thank You God for Mommy, and Thank You God for Daddy. She's collaborated with authors ranging from New York Times bestsellers to her very own son. 2 of these collaborations, Firebird and Courageous Teens, are recipients of Christian Retailing's Best Awards. But Amy's greatest reward is being a wife to Daniel and a mom to their amazing sons, Michael and Ethan. How was that?
That about covers it. Yeah.
So really, you've written and co-written more than 60 books. That is pretty impressive.
Yeah. And then before that, I had also, and actually along the way, I have ghost written some as well. So that number is actually higher, but I only include the books that have my name on them.
So let's get right into it. Let's kind of talk about your upbringing history. You know, I've heard your story a little bit on a few other podcasts, but, you know, would you be willing to share?
Yeah. So if you can't tell from my accent, I was born and raised in Middle Tennessee. I grew up in a tiny town called Watertown, which is probably 45 minutes east of Nashville. It is a Mayberry town. It was an idyllic place to grow up. We played in creeks. There was a creek across the street, so my 2 brothers and I played in the creeks. And with the neighborhood kids, we rode our bikes around the block until it got dark. We had baseball games kind of in the backyard, but and pick up football games and stuff like that. So we just, it was just a wonderful place to grow up. And all of, you know, what they say about small towns, everybody knows everybody. And that was very true where we were. And everything was sort of interconnected. You know, my math teacher was my neighbor. The song leader at our church was the postmaster at the post office, and tiny little post office. And so just everybody knew everybody, and it just made really this type of family growing up. We just had our 25-year reunion, telling my age here, but you know, a lot of those people I feel like we just really shared a childhood together. A lot of those people from kindergarten all the way through graduating, I spent every day, except for the summers, with those people. So it wasn't, and you went to the same school, K through 12. So those people are your brothers and sisters who you really grew up with through your entire childhood.
Yeah. So after high school, and I know I skipped a little bit here, but you didn't go right into writing or wanting to be an author. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah. So when I went to college, my first semester, I declared a major in nursing. I was working at a local hospital and I loved what I did. And I thought, I'm going to be a nurse. My mom's a nurse. And, she's a really great nurse too. And so for that first semester, my major was in nursing. And then I don't remember what clicked or what switched, but suddenly I did a complete 180 and switched to a major in English and decided I was going to be an English teacher. And my junior year, I think maybe somebody mentioned it my sophomore year, but I think it was my junior year when I actually went to Tommy Nelson and applied for an internship there. And when I walked in to that room or that building where they were, it was just, there was like a wagon sitting on like a little red wagon sitting on the ground, and it was full of books that they had done and toys and plush. And there was a gumball machine that was taller than I was. And it was just this really fun, kid environment. And then when you dig into what they're actually doing, actually serving kids where they are, bringing the word of God to them in a language that they can understand, I just thought, wow, that's really a mission that I want to be a part of. And I just love the word nerdiness of it, the editorial part of it and all the intricacies of bringing a book to life. I just loved every part of it, and I just wanted to be a part of that. I never, even at that point, didn't even think about being an author. I was just an intern. I did copyright requests and made copies. I stood at the copy machine a lot, looked at proofreading marks and things like that, and that allowed me to be a freelance proofreader. After my internship was over, they gave me some freelance jobs to do. So I maintained a relationship with them doing freelance projects throughout the rest of my college career. But it was at that point when I fell in love with publishing, I decided I didn't want to be an English teacher anymore. And that was really tough for me because an English teacher gave me tons of job security. And I didn't know how many editorial jobs there were out there. And it was just sort of this blank slate, like what will happen if I don't, become a certified teacher? And will I even be able to find a job? So shortly after college, I started editing healthcare education software. I got a job at a place called HealthStream. Then about 6 or 9 months into that job, Tommy Nelson called and they had a full-time editorial position for me. So I was so excited. I'd finally gotten my dream job of editing children's books. And then 6 or 9 months into that, they call me into a conference room and tell me, you're here today because today is your last day at Thomas Nelson.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they had sort of an across-the-board cutback, and I was the new guy. So they had to let me go. And I started crying because that was my dream job. But they said, wait, we want to take you to lunch. We want to talk to you about freelancing. And I didn't know what that would look like as an editor. Like, I had done it, sort of on the side, but can you really make a full-time living being a freelancer? I didn't know what that looked like. But they had someone to walk me through that. And so I became a full-time editorial freelancer and still did the same job basically, but I did a lot of it from home. And that allowed me to pick up writing jobs at that point. And it was then that I discovered how much I really loved the writing side of things. And one day they said, we need this adult book adapted into a teen book. That was probably my first big project like that. It was called The Traveler's Gift by Andy Andrews, and I adapted it into a teen book called The Young Traveler's Gift. But it was geared toward teens so that they could get that same message, but in a format that they would actually enjoy reading. And then from there, it just grew. So about 2007, I wrote a night prayer about just sort of about it's meant to lull children to sleep. You know, it's preparing for that bedtime routine and just reassures children with the message that, you know, God is watching over them and they are, you know, it leaves them with that sense of comfort. So that was the first one, and that kicked off the entire Night series.
I know you have kids that are older now, so were they inspiring to write that first book to be able to get them to sleep? Or
yes. So at that time, the redhead, he's the one that made me relearn everything about parenting. He's my strong, yeah, he is my strong-willed child, and I'm sorry, but he enforces all of the redhead stereotypes. But anyway, I was trying to get him to sleep one night, and nothing was working. And I had sung all the songs and read all the books, and he was still wiggling in the bed. And I just laid back, really out of exhaustion and frustration, probably. And I saw the tree swaying out the window, and I said, "Shh, the trees are sleeping." And he stopped for a second, and he looked out the window, and I think it sort of clicked to him that maybe his not going to sleep was keeping the trees awake while they were trying to sleep. So anyway, we went through and talked about everything else that was sleeping. The sun is sleeping, the birds are sleeping. And that settled him in and got him to go to sleep. And it was one of those lightning bolt moments. I woke up in the middle of the night with this verse ringing in my head. And so I hopped up and wrote down, you know, what was ringing in my head and sort of turned it into what I thought was a manuscript. I'd worked with manuscripts for a while, and so I knew what that was supposed to look like. Well, then about a week later, I was in-house at Tommy Nelson, and the publisher said, we're needing a bedtime book for this distributor. And I said, well, I just wrote one last week. And she looked at me kind of funny, and she was like, okay, well, send it to me. And so I sent it to her, and she said, yeah, I think this can work. So we edited it and came up with the Night title, and it sold well. Apparently, I wasn't the only one struggling with getting my child to sleep at night. And so it just, you know, gave birth to this entire series. And so this is our 11th year of the Night series, and we're still releasing new books. So it's really been a cool thing to watch, especially in hindsight.
Yeah, so you went on to do the Night series. I see you actually have a Night storybook collection audio version as well.
Yes, that one is really cool. That is all of the Night books, except for the Bible storybook and the devotions. I think there are 7 books. The first 7 Night books are all in that audio collection.
You have so many board books, including the Night series that you talked about. You have picture books, devotionals. I see you've even been involved in some journals and some Bibles as well. So really, really all over the board. So, you know, after you kind of came out with the Night series and, you know, your creativity started flowing there. So, you know, what inspired you, or how did you get the ideas for the other books that you've come out with afterwards?
Some of those were, you know, just intentional planning sort of things. And those are, you know, not as fun to talk about, but I mean, they fit a need. But the Plans I Have for You series is one that you were talking about. There's actually an entire NIV Bible based on the Plans I Have for You series. And that was another one of those just sort of lightning bolt moments where I was sitting on the couch. I can picture myself sitting there. I don't know what I was doing, but I just heard, and it was probably one of those things where I'd heard Jeremiah 29:11 several times that week, you know, when the same verse you keep hearing it from different places. It was probably something like that. But I was sitting on my couch and I heard, hey, you, I've got big plans for you. And I thought, oh, that would be such a fun way to present this message to kids. Like, God has great plans for all of us. And so, and I don't think God stands up there and speaks in Old English, you know. I think he talks to us in a way that we would understand, and in a way that's encouraging. So I just put that entire message to verse and in this exuberant, encouraging voice. Hey, you, I've got big plans for you. Yes, you and you and you over there too. I need you in a forest and you at the zoo, and you'll be an entomologist in a forest in Peru. Oh wait, no, I need you in a hospital. Anyway, so it's just this really fun verse that encourages every child and lets every child know that God does have big plans for them. And so then that one became this, it started as a picture book. Then they did a board book with it for the little ones in sort of that indestructible format for toddlers. And then there's also a devotional that goes with it, a journal, and a full text NIV Bible. So whatever range of age you are, there's something out there for you that delivers this message that God has good plans for you. The journal is really fun too in that series, and that one's been out a while, so you can usually find some pretty good deals on. I've seen the Bible as much as half price. So yeah, look around, you'll find some good deals on those.
Yeah. So a couple interesting things too are you've done some nonfiction. You've worked on a book called Courageous Teens and Fireproof Your Life for Teens, which were collaborations with the guys with Sherwood Baptist Church, right? So
right.
Stephen and Alex Kendrick.
Yes. And so Michael Catt was the pastor of that church. I think he still is. But anyway, Michael Catt wrote some adult nonfiction books to go with those two movies, Courageous and Fireproof. And I adapted the two nonfiction adult books that he wrote into books for teens, because Fireproof, if you remember the movie, Fireproof sort of dealt with divorce. But the Fireproof Your Life doesn't have anything to do with divorce for teens, you know.
Sure.
But it talks about fireproofing your relationship and fireproofing your money habits and things like that. So it's really this great overview of sort of making your life fireproof by using biblical principles to do so. And then there are two others that I did with more recently with the Kendrick brothers. And those were actually with Stephen and Alex Kendrick, but also based on the movies. War Room was all based on prayer. So there's a book called Prayer Works that's for kids about 7 to 12 that just helps them to internalize and practice the principles of prayer that they present. I didn't mean to use that much alliteration, but the principles of prayer that they present in War Room. And then most recently, I did the same age range, age 12, with Overcomer, a book called Wonderful that just, again, gives those principles in a language that kids will understand, and also helps them apply those principles about Overcomers, about identity in Christ. And it just helps them apply those principles in their daily lives. So
yes, I mean, I was looking through, reading through the descriptions of all these books, and was just blown away by what you're doing. So two books that, I was kind of stuck out, which don't really relate to kids at all, are a couple, looks like autobiographies you may have worked on.
Yeah. So one, I helped Jack Hanna to he has an autobiography out there. Jack Hanna, the animal guy that was on David Letterman forever and Good Morning America. He had one that was written in the 90s. And a lot has happened to him since the 90s. So a few years ago, he and I worked together to update that and to add a lot of his more recent adventures. And that includes travels to Rwanda. And he's built a home in Rwanda, and just his relationship with the people of Rwanda. And through that, he introduced me to a young man named Frederick. And when we were doing the interview, he said, forget about my story. You've got to tell Frederick's story. And I said, okay, well, let's get finished with this story first. But after that, it just sort of kept nagging at me about Frederick's story and how it just needed to be told. And Frederick was, he lived in Rwanda, during the genocide, and his family did escape during the genocide and came back, but they lived right on the border of where a lot of the people who had instigated the genocide, they lived right on the border of where they had escaped to. Mm-hmm. And so even years after the genocide was, at least by the media, called finished and, it's all done, it's all resolved. But for years, they would still try to come back over the border and try to just start it up again. And so Frederick was on a bus. He was a teenager, 15 or 16 years old, and he was on a bus with other people. And these guys set up a roadblock and forced Frederick to get off the bus, all the people to get off the bus. And they told Frederick, we want you to kill all these people. And Frederick said, yeah, a teenager, I just see my teenage son and that happening. And anyway, they said, we want you to kill all these people. And he said, my God won't let me do that. And so I won't go into all the gory details, but he ends up losing his hands. They cut his hands off and he becomes disabled. And so in that country, when you're disabled, it's just really a struggle. You have to be able to work there in order to support and provide for yourself. And when you're disabled, it just, you're just seen as, the lowest rung of society in a lot of ways. And so what Frederick has done is completely revolutionize the way disabled people or differently abled or whatever. He just says, I am able. He just brings a completely different perspective to that. He and his friend Zachary have started a school. And at first it was for adults and gave them work skills. Now it is this full-blown preschool, elementary school, and secondary school, and then also a school for adults that gives free education to people with any sort of handicap. And then it's also a private school, but if you don't have a handicap, you have to pay to go to school there, and people are happy to do it. But they offer free education for people who are disabled. They go into people's homes, provide transportation, bring them up literally out of the dirt and bring them into this school and give them an education. It is the most redemptive, beautiful thing. And just being a part of that book was so transformative for my entire family. It's a beautiful story.
Yeah, I would highly recommend this book. And on a side note, I had actually went and watched this TED Talk on YouTube with Frederick, and it was just very heartbreaking about what went on. And so I would recommend everyone taking a look at that too.
I was just going to say something I love about his story is it's heartbreaking as far as the tragedy of the genocide, but then to see all of the beauty that he's brought out of that is just, it's the story of redemption that we all want to see come out of a tragedy like that.
So you have a couple exciting things coming up. You have 2 books coming out October 15th, which by the time this podcast comes out, those books will already be out and selling like crazy. You have
I hope so.
You have Night Devotions, which is 90 devotions for bedtime, and also God is With Us. Do you just want to kind of talk about those 2 books?
Yes. So in March, we released Night Bible Stories. And then October, and that's 30 stories for bedtime. And then October is the devotional that is a great companion. They're the same size. So if you wanted to put them together and give them as a gift, the people at Tommy Nelson thought through all of that. And they're padded like the board books. If you're a fan of the board books, they are padded like the board books, but they are, over 200 pages each. So they're really just a little more substantial than the board books. And it's 90 devotions that have the same soft, comforting message that you'll find in the board books as well. But there are 90 of them, and they're short and sweet and simple, easy to understand. So they're perfect to send your kiddos to sleep with a nice little devotion, spending time with God. And then God is With Us is just this beautiful lyrical board book that takes Emmanuel, God is with us, and just expounds on that in very real life, practical ways. It talks about, of course, the big picture of God with us and Emmanuel and Jesus coming to earth. But it also talks about the everyday things that remind us that God is with us as well. So it's sort of a new approach. It's the illustrations are stunningly beautiful. They're this really soft blue and white snow-capped, illustration, but it ends with the nativity story and reminds us that God is with us. So anyway, I love them both, and I can't wait for people to get their hands on them. I just heard from my editor today that God is With Us is going to be carried by Walmart and by Barnes & Noble. So I think you should be able to find it in both of those places, and then, of course, on Amazon.
You know what? I think you're adventuring in the podcast world too, right?
Yes.
I saw you're doing a podcast called the Bible for Kids podcast, and you're doing that with author and co-creator of VeggieTales, Mike Nawrocki. So can you kind of just talk a few minutes about that and how that came about?
Well, my agent said, "Do you want to do a podcast?" And I said, "Absolutely not. Never." I don't know anything about podcasting. I don't know anything about audio. I will never do a podcast. And then he figured out, my agent, Dan Lynch, with Brentwood Studios, figured out a way to make it work. We've partnered with Way FM, so we're on the Way Nation platform. We go into the Way FM studios, record our podcast. All I have to do is put on headphones and talk, and then I prepare, of course, for the interviews and things like that. But it's the easiest thing in the world, and when he presented it to me, I thought it was so overwhelming. And then Mike Nawrocki, he was made for podcasting. He was, he's been doing voice over pretty much his entire career. I mean, he started in college. That's when, right out of college or in college, they came up with the idea of VeggieTales. So he's such a pro and so interesting just to sit across from and listen to. So I don't know how I got in that room, but I am completely tickled that I did. And we just talk about biblical resources for parents, whether that be music, film, song, whatever. We just try to find all of the resources that we think would be great for kids in sharing biblical values. And then we just deliver those to parents so that they can, listen and hear sort of the behind the scenes of how all of those came to be, and then see if that's something that they want for their family.
Yeah, again, so that's called the Bible for Kids podcast, and it's pretty much available everywhere. So, and I've been listening to it, so it's really good stuff, and can't wait to hear more. So
yeah, I've had a lot of fun doing it, and I hope people enjoy listening to it as well.
Yes, and those guys over at Way FM are incredible. So
yeah, they just took all of the things that scared me about podcasting, and they just took care of it. So
I noticed you have some events coming up for the rest of the year. You're doing Kids Day Christian Publishers Outlet, Murfreesboro on November 9th. You're going to be in Jackson, Tennessee, which I think is actually closer to Memphis, or maybe a couple hours west of Nashville.
It is. So Christian Publishers Outlet, if you're anywhere in the Murfreesboro area, you should go check it out. It is the nicest store. The nicest people work there, and they have really the best prices on Christian products. And then they have other stuff like Pete the Cat, the little early readers. And when they have a kids' day, they bring out Pete the Cat or the Berenstain Bears, or they have celebrities like that there, and then they let authors like me come and sign. So I will be there on November 9th. And then they just this year, actually just a couple of months ago, opened a new store in Jackson, Tennessee, near Union University. And so I'm going out there, and Mike Nawrocki will be there too on November 16th to do the Kids Day in Jackson.
Yeah, on a side note, that's very encouraging. They're still opening stores because there are not very many bookstores anymore.
Yeah, and Dave Tanner, the owner of Christian Publishers Outlet, he and his wife. But Dave grew up in the Lifeway system or in the Christian book system. So he's seen the ins and outs and how it works from a corporate standpoint. And I think he's been able to apply those on a, just on a smaller, more agile basis. And so he has, while other stores are closing, he's opening stores. And it's really a gorgeous store with great prices. It's really, I can't say enough about what an awesome store they are. And when they do Kids Day, they have face painters come out, and they just really make it a family event that makes you want to come back again and again.
I saw you're also going to be a part of Writer Fest Nashville in the end of November. I think it's November 22nd to 23rd, and that's kind of a gathering of aspiring writers, published authors, screenwriters, poets, songwriters, everything writing. So are you just attending, or are you actually going to be speaking at that event?
So I'm going to be on a publishing panel where we talk about traditional versus self-publishing. So I'll be on a panel with several other people who know a lot more about it than I do. But Amy McConnell, she is, I worked with her at Thomas Nelson when I was an intern. And then she went on to Simon & Schuster. And so she has oodles of experience in the publishing world. She's such a respected editor, and she's still editing and co-writing books today. But she has created this. She dreamed this up. And the first one was last year. And so I'm sure this year is going to be even more amazing. But I love how she took such a, multimedia approach to it. It's screenwriters. I sat in on a screenwriting, or actually it was more about film production with Steve Taylor last year when I went. I sat in on that workshop. Liz Kukowski from Saturday Night Live was there talking about, writing and production of, TV. And it's just such a, I don't want to say holistic, but multimedia approach to writing in general. So there's songwriting. I sat in on a songwriting workshop. So it's not just about books. It's any kind of really creative can find something useful at Writer Fest. It's such a great event.
Getting close to wrapping up here, if you weren't writing or authoring, what would Amy Parker be doing?
Oh, that is a hard question. I don't know. I mean, what would I do for fun? I always said I would work in a bookstore for free. So that's probably cheating, isn't it? Because it's still, but I would work in a bookstore. I'd probably work in a preschool or something. I love being around that age of kids and just teaching. So yeah, I would probably fall back on my original plan of teaching.
From the looks of social media, you're very family involved. I'm just guessing outside of writing, you're very centered on your family. It looks like you guys enjoy being in the outdoors.
Yes,
What else do you guys like to do?
Well, I have 2 boys and an Eagle Scout husband. So glamping is a foreign concept to this family. We like to be outdoors. We like to be by the water. I am coming to you from my husband's office because we are staying on the water this week, and there's no Wi-Fi there. So we just like to be out and walking around the neighborhood. My husband he's also a land surveyor. So he spends a lot of time outdoors and then drags us out there and makes us be outdoors too, which is wonderful. It's just so restoring, I think, to be outside and in fresh air. And so I do a lot of work from my front porch where I can just be outside. So anyway, anything that's outside, rivers, lakes, oceans, that's where we like to be. And we have a lot of fun doing that.
Your website is amyparkerbooks.com. You can go on there and see everything you've done. Is that the best way for listeners to find you?
Yes, I think so. I'm on Instagram at Amy Parker Books, and then Facebook is Amy Parker Author. But yeah, my website is the portal that will take you to all of those places, show you all of the books, all of the events coming up, or I try to keep up with that on my website. And yeah, so amyparkerbooks.com is the best place to go.